Hello and welcome, fellow lifelong learners. Thanks for joining me for One More Thing, a radio show all about cultivating our most valuable asset, our mind, and fostering a sense of curiosity to learn one more thing. We feature passionate practitioners and seasoned experts in numerous areas of interest for lifelong learners of all ages. One More Thing is sponsored by Kiffin & Company, a corporate learning and talent development consulting firm, and I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert, a certified professional in talent development, learning advocate, and your fellow lifelong learner. Welcome to the show. All right, I hope y'all were able to listen to our inaugural show last week. The owner of Power Me Up radio station here on iHeartRadio interviewed me to kick off One More Thing and to learn a little bit more about me. This week, I wanted to let you get to know this show a little better. What to expect, how it came to be, about the name, and so on. You'll find that each show will start with a story, then we'll feature a guest or maybe a panel of guests, and we'll end the show with a tie back to corporate learning and development, since that's what my business, Kiffin & Company, is all about. So true to this format, let me start with a story. Growing up, my grandparents lived in a condo that faced their community pool. My siblings, cousins, and other families spent a lot of time at that pool. Some of us even learned to swim or dive in that pool. As far back as I can remember, there were very few tantrums when it was time to get out, because at some point, a genius in the family, no one seems to remember who, started the tradition of one last thing. Here's how I remember it. When it was getting close to time to get out of the pool and go home, or at least back to the condo, my mom or granny or other adult relative would say, "It's almost time for one last thing." We all knew that that meant we were going to have to leave soon, but it gave us a heads up that the time was coming and allowed us to think about what our last thing would be. Then when that time came, the same or another grown-up would say, "Okay, kids, it's time to do your one last thing." I won't say that there was never a tantrum, and certainly there were some "oh man" and the like, but generally speaking, there was just a flurry of, "Okay, watch this, watch me," while each kid dove off the diving board, jumped in from the side of the deep end, or retrieved a brass ring from the bottom of the pool. And then we all got out and began the process of drying off, packing up our swim bags, and talking about what snack we wanted. I used this one last thing concept even with my nieces and nephews. I can remember more than one occasion when I took two of my nephews, who are now 18 and 20, to public pools or playgrounds and saw other parents or guardians watch in awe as I told them to do their one last thing. They did as I watched, and then we left. It really left a big impression on me, as you can tell. I tell you all of this because I had a list of possible names as I was trying to decide what to call this show. While One Last Thing didn't seem appropriate for a show about lifelong learning, it did stir the memory of those occasions when we got to do one more last thing. So in the spirit of there always being one more thing to do, there's also always one more thing to learn. All right, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back.
Maximize impact with tailored solutions by partnering with Kiffin & Company. Developing your team is an investment, but it doesn't have to be just an expense. Discover more at kiffinandcompany.com and start your journey to effective learning today.
I told you that the second part of each show will be an interview. And my goal is to have all different kinds of guests talking about all different kinds of things so that you, my fellow lifelong learners, can be introduced to something totally new to you or gain a deeper knowledge about something that you have an interest in, or maybe even realize that you have an interest that you didn't know you had. The first several shows will feature individuals I know personally or who were introduced to me by someone I know personally. Because y'all, I am blessed to know some interesting people. With that said, though, I would really love for you to submit your suggestions for topics and guests that I should feature. Truly, the sky is the limit, with one caveat. This is a fun, positive, and no drama show. So submit those ideas of what you would like to learn or what you think others might be interested in to my email, one more thing at kiffinandcompany.com. That's ONE more thing at kiffinandcompany.com. I look forward to hearing all of your amazing suggestions. Additionally, if you would like to sponsor an episode of One More Thing, you can email me as well. I will be featuring one sponsor along with my own business during short commercial breaks, so why not let it be you? I would love to see if your business, book, organization is a fit for our show. Okay, on to story number 2 for today. As I was talking with one of my cousins the other day about this show and specifically about what I wanted to talk about in this episode, she started talking about the blessing that we had being raised in a family with adults who, as a general rule, allowed children to participate and taught them about what they were doing instead of just shooing them away to go play or do whatever. I'm not sure if other generations would agree with this. Certainly in previous generations, society was different. You've heard the old adage of children were to be seen and not heard. However, for my generation, she is so right, and I had never really thought about that before. We have a family reunion every year that is like no other I've ever heard about. While telling you about that would probably be an episode all on its own. In fact, that's making me think maybe it should be. What I will say about it is that there's always been a concerted effort to have activities that include all generations. From silly to educational to serious, having that interaction and learning from each other has likely played a much larger role in my development than I ever realized. In fact, when I was first contemplating having a radio show and podcast, several people made comments about me interviewing high-profile people in the learning and development space, my career area. While I would love to do that at some point, I was really drawn to the idea of lifelong learning and a show about all sorts of areas of interest. I realized at some point that my desire to learn all the things runs in my family. So maybe I'm fulfilling some sort of destiny? I don't know. But this just really feels right. Since I am not interviewing anyone else on today's show and wanted to give y'all a little more context about what I do, I've asked a few people to give me questions to answer for today's show. So here we go. First question. How did you get into corporate learning? Oh, this is a twofer. How did you get into corporate learning, and did you always know training was going to be your career? The answer is no, I did not know this would be my career. Actually, my first memory of being an educator was allowing my younger siblings and cousins to be my students as I played the role of teacher on the stairs of my grandparents' home. Also, I am the daughter of a teacher, and I have several cousins, aunts, uncles, great aunts, and great uncles who were all teachers or professors. So you would think that perhaps it was obvious even back then that I would be an educator professionally, but you would actually be wrong. Somewhere around the 6th grade, I became obsessed with Sandra Day O'Connor. Yes, the Supreme Court Justice, and decided that I was going to become a lawyer and one day sit on the Supreme Court just like Justice O'Connor. At some point in high school or maybe college, I think, I started saying that I was going to go to law school to become a juvenile court advocate. I did end up going to law school and a fairly prestigious one, but wow, it was a dose of reality. Ultimately, I realized it was just not the right place for me. My classmates were excited about the amount of money they would make, the idea of working for a big firm, and so on. Juvenile court advocacy work was never going to be lucrative, even as an attorney. So long story short, I left law school, and honestly, I floundered for a little bit of time trying to decide what to do with my life since the plan that I'd formulated in the 6th grade had just dissolved. I'm not going to take you through the play-by-play, but through working with a nonprofit organization, I found adult education, and I loved it. I was hired into the corporate learning space by a logistics company that was small but growing and had never had a formal training department before. I absolutely loved the opportunity of building a program from the ground up. And that's how I got into corporate learning and where I found my career path. Okay, the second question is again a 2-for-1. What do you actually do and what is corporate learning? This is a funny one because for years, one of my very best friends used to say something like, I don't really know what you do, something about business and training adults and forklifts. She was actually on the right track. And the funny thing about the forklifts is that in that first corporate role, I did facilitate an annual safety training for operating a forklift. And that reminds me that one of the supervisors there promised to teach me how to drive a forklift, but he never actually did. A missed opportunity. Anyway, corporate learning is multifaceted and often depends on the size of an organization, the industry, and so on. In that first role, I was a one-person team, so I did it all. At other companies, you may have an individual or team that strictly handles onboarding for new hires, another one for technical systems for specific roles, and another one for leadership development. You get the idea, right? Additionally, though, you may have a team with roles based on specific skill sets, like an instructional designer that designs the learning, an e-learning developer, someone who has the technology skills to actually go in and create the final product of a self-paced e-learning. You may have a trainer, the person who actually does the facilitation, a learning management system administrator, so someone who handles the back end of the system where all the training is housed. Or you may have team members that fill multiple of those roles. And this just touches on some basic generalities. There are lots of other roles, skills, and teams that could be part of an organization's learning and development, or L&D, function. Ultimately, the role of L&D is to empower employees' growth in their own and desired roles, so future forward thinking, and to develop their knowledge, skills, attitudes, and abilities to improve performance and business results. And I'm going to plug L&D here with a quick statistic because I want everyone to understand the impact workplace learning can have. Organizations with a strong learning culture have 30 to 50% higher rates of retention and engagement. That is real impact on an organization's bottom line. And that's from a 2023 Forbes study, by the way. What I strive to do is to help organizations improve their strategy and execution of learning opportunities for their particular workforce. Okay, question 3. Why did you start Kiffin and Company? The short answer, the timing was right. But I'm guessing that the person who submitted that question wanted a little more information, and you probably do too. So here's a little bit longer version. From 2010 to 2017, I had a similar business under a different name. And looking back, during that time, I did a lot of freelance work and a little bit of consulting. I loved the flexibility of working for myself and the sense of accomplishment from working with multiple organizations. But then in late 2017, I took what was supposed to be a 3-month contract role with a healthcare organization that was implementing a new market and needed an additional training resource for the clinical education team to support that implementation. Toward the end of that project, which had been extended, the organization was growing and making some large structural changes. I was asked to join that organization full-time and lead the non-clinical side of the learning and development team. I hesitated to shutter my own business, but this seemed like such a great opportunity to pour my passion and expertise into a single organization again. There were a lot of lessons learned and growth through experiences during my 6.5 years there. Then earlier this year, I was part of an enterprise-wide reduction in force. I was laid off. And as I started looking for my next opportunity, it occurred to me that all of my thoughts of returning to consulting were continuing to get louder. I knew I didn't want to just reopen my previous business. I wanted to create something more modern, more reflective of me, and showcase the network that I've built. The purpose behind the "and" company in Kiffin and Company is not so much that I want to build a big company, but instead that I want to continue to connect resources to needs within my ever-growing network of professionals. And ultimately, I wanted to create a business with which I can make a real impact. So often I hear companies saying, we need training on fill in the blank, without determining if training is actually what is needed. Helping organizations determine what that appropriate solution is to a given problem is the starting point. Designing and developing content and materials, making learning engaging and easily accessible, and ensuring the framework for retention and behavior change come once training is identified as a true need. So why did I start Kiffin and Company? Bottom line, I started this company so that I could work with organizations that actually want to use my experience and expertise to improve performance. Okay, that was a long answer, I know. And after this quick break, I'll be back to answer the last 2 or 3 questions.
Maximize impact with tailored solutions by partnering with Kiffin and Company. Developing your team is an investment, but it doesn't have to be just an expense. Discover more at kiffinandcompany.com and start your journey to effective learning today.
Welcome back, and here we go with the last couple of questions. Do you specialize in any particular industry? I get asked similar questions like this pretty often. Much of my career within learning and development has been within healthcare. However, I have worked with companies in a variety of industries, including logistics, education, technology, nonprofit, and even government. When using adult learning principles and keeping both learners and desired outcomes at the forefront, the industry doesn't matter as much unless you are getting into really role specific or perhaps industry specific information. And that's actually a great segue because the next question is, when you design training, do you have to come up with all the content? And the short answer is no, or at least not always. You may have heard the term subject matter expert or SME. Often I can work with a SME who has intricate knowledge of a subject, and then I work with them to design a course or a curriculum. For example, I don't have to have expert knowledge around congestive heart failure, but I can work with a SME who does to create a course based on the desired outcomes of that education. Which that triggers me a thought too that I want to share here. Formal training is not always what is needed to get the results that are desired. Sticking with that congestive heart failure CHF example, during nursing school, clinicians learn about diagnoses and they'll have likely multiple resources with detailed information about the condition itself. If the need is to improve their documentation for patients with CHF, a course may not be needed. Perhaps they just need a job aid or a tip sheet that has specific information that they need to be sure that they are documenting accurately and completely for that patient. With all of that said, there have been times, though, where I did have to do all of the research and design and development for learning without a SME. This is especially true for workshops and e-learning courses around leadership, communication, and other power skills. Okay, we're down to the last question. What are you learning about currently? Oh, this is a good one. I have so many interests, and I've already said that I like learning all the things. But if I had to pick one or two, let's see. Even though I find it a little overwhelming, I am learning about AI and related technologies, especially in relation to learning and development. I really find it fascinating, but man, there's so much out there. I also love learning about anything travel related or cultures, other countries, other areas, regions. I'm actually about to go on my very first cruise, so that's going to be a learning experience of its own, being on a cruise ship. And we are going to Alaska, which I have never visited. So travel and AI, there's two things for you. I want to thank those of you who submitted these questions. As you can likely tell, I am very passionate about adult learning, and I could probably continue talking about the different facets, methodologies, trends, etc. But I have to wrap it up because we are out of time for today's show. True to the show's name, I thought of one more story. And it's all about my grandfather, who we unfortunately lost in 2017. But I think you'll find it both endearing and humorous. So, my grandfather was a World War II fighter pilot. Then he was career military. He was an XO of a aircraft carrier, and he actually left the military when he was about to get promoted to the level. So he was a captain, he retired a captain, but he was about to get a promotion. And when he found out that he was no longer going to be able to fly at that level of rank, he decided that that was the end for him. And he left the military and he actually became a charter pilot on private planes. So anyway, he obviously was a big fan of flying. Later in life, by the way, the very last squadron reunion that he attended that I was fortunate enough to get to go to, they had 5 TBF Avengers, and they were taking the veterans up in the aircraft. And I I didn't see him going up to get on one of the planes. So I went over and asked him, are you not going to take a ride in the plane? And he, at, 90-ish, very clearly looked at me and said, I fly planes. I don't ride in them. So anyway, crazy enough, I got to go up in his place and fly in formation with these TBF Avengers. It was phenomenal, an incredible experience in my life. But I digress, because where I was going with this is, so you can imagine he is a military man, career military pilot, very structured, and always learning. I always saw him reading when I visited. He was very into baseball and history and all. At one point, I went to visit him, and he was talking about wanting to get a computer. He did do email and stuff, but I think he had a very old computer or something. So we went and we got him a computer, and I was getting it all set up, and I was showing him how to use different things. And one of the things at the time was Skype. And I thought that Skype was going to be this, oh my gosh, moment for him, because he could video chat. I lived 9 hours away from him. And so he could video chat with me, my sister, other relatives. And I thought that was going to just blow his mind. And he did think it was really cool and great. But the thing that he thought was the coolest was actually Pandora. I started asking him about, I know you like Glenn Miller. Tell me some other musicians and bands and things that you like. So he starts telling me, and as I'm sitting at the computer, and what I was doing at the time was setting up his Pandora stations. Well, he comes over and he's got this armload of CDs, because he knew that those could be downloaded, uploaded onto the computer, burned, whatever. So he thought that that's what I was going to do for him. And I was like, no, 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 no. Look, I've set you up this station, and now it's going to be all music by or like Glenn Miller, whichever other ones we put on there for him. And he was absolutely mind blown. He just stared at me and he was like, but where's it coming from? I tried to explain it in fairly simple terms, and he just shook his head and said his normal statement of, I was born 100 years too early. The other one that he really was mind blown about was YouTube. He was talking about changing out a toilet or something, and so I showed him a video of how to do that, and he had an old Thunderbird car, and he said, well, I need to know how to do blah blah on the Thunderbird. I bet that's not on there. Sure enough, y'all, I was able to find a video that showed him exactly how to do the repair, or the change out a piece of equipment or something that he was wanting to do. Absolutely mind blown. The last thing I want to tell you in relation to him and this concept of lifelong learning is he had become enamored of, I don't remember the name of the company, but it was a company that he could order DVDs from that had like lessons. It was almost like I think the old timey, like there were correspondence courses or something. Well, this was like a video catalog of courses. So he was very interested in those. And I know he had some about the universe and science and stuff. But bless his little heart, when I got involved in a wine business, so I still have a wine business on the side and love wine and educating people about wine. So when he heard me talking about it and he asked me about it and I was telling him kind of what I was doing with wine, the next thing I know, I got a package in the mail that was a set of these DVDs about basically about becoming a wine master, beyond a sommelier to an actual wine master, which is way beyond where I ever had aspirations. But I just think that that is so fun. Like if you think about, he was in his 90s and still so excited about learning. So I hope that this show will foster that love of learning in others that he had. What an example. Thank you so much for spending your time listening to this show. I truly do hope that it brings joy and interest to your day and that you keep coming back for more. Don't forget to email me topic suggestions to one more thing, all spelled out, one more thing, at kiffinandcompany.com. Next week, I'll have my first guest interview and you won't want to miss it. So until then, keep learning one more thing. You've been listening to One More Thing, a radio show on the Power Me Up radio station on iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to you tuning in next time as we continue cultivating your mind with one more thing.